Hey, everybody. Up next, we're joined by Marielle Velander, Product Portfolio Manager at N26, with experience at Babbel, Dashlane, and a Prosy certification in change management. Marielle brings a human-centered approach to product ops. Today, she'll share how to master the human side of change management beyond roadmaps and processes. Over to you, Marielle.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Really nice to meet all of you virtually. I'm excited to walk through how to approach change from a product operations perspective tonight to build on, or tonight, I'm based in Barcelona, so it's 8 p.m. currently over here. And good morning to all of you. And now we're going to move into starting off with a question for all of you to reflect on what change feels like at your organization. So, before I fully introduce myself, I'm curious, how does change feel at your company? Does it feel like being a fish out of water? Does it feel, or does it maybe feel like you're herding cats? Like everyone is going in different directions, there's no alignment. Does it feel maybe like a bull in a china shop? Something's bound to break, you're not really sure where or when, but you're treading forward very cautiously? Or is there an elephant in the room? Is there something not being said openly about this change? So I'm curious, just to start the conversation, what do you feel like change looks like at your company? If you think about a recent change process as maybe moving into a new tool or a new way of doing things, and yeah, we'll take a few seconds to see people's responses. So, yeah, a lot of people can recognize the sense of herding cats, struggling to really get alignment. So, we'll talk a little bit about tactics to address that. And also feeling like a bull in a china shop, like something is bound to break. I'll give you some insight into some frameworks that I've used in those cases. And then an elephant in the room. Some of you also mentioned that you felt that before. So we'll talk a little bit about the importance of establishing transparency throughout the change. And I'll also actually start off with how we address feeling like a fish out of water, but it seems like that is a scenario that doesn't resonate as much with this group. So we will move quickly through that part. But before I go further in, I'd love to tell you a bit more about basically what we're going to do today. So first of all, feeling like a fish out of water is all about how do we manage to set the context for change. Secondly, we're going to talk about how to make everyone comfortable and aligned with the change that we're trying to bring in. When we're talking about feeling like a bull in a china shop, we're going to talk about tools and frameworks to feel like we're proactively addressing any resistance or any risk of something breaking down the line. And finally, we're going to talk about the importance of transparency and really sustaining change and reinforcing it for the future. So, what is change management essentially, and how is it related to product operations, which is the field I've been based in for the past 5+ years? So, when I talk about change, I am speaking about it in the context of a shift in a process or a tool or a ritual that could potentially allow teams to work more effectively with each other and to collaborate more easily. And this comes from a longer trajectory that I've gone through, a journey basically to arrive to some of the learnings that I'm going to share with you. So I'll give you a brief intro. I'm Marielle. I actually have a background in anthropology. This is actually a photo from some ethnographic research I was doing in Brazil. Almost 8 years ago now. And I used to really explore on a deep research level, how do people behave? Why do we behave the way we do? And how can we take that learning about our human inclinations and really drive better practices? And so that brought me into an operations role at a small digital security startup in France called Dashlane. And that's really an example of feeling like a fish out of water because I moved to France not even speaking French. I had never worked in tech before, only in international development and in academia, in anthropology. And so it was an experience of learning a new vocabulary, a new way of processing things. But what stayed the same was the humans that make up the organism and the organization that I was working in, and really understanding that I could take these anthropological tools to understand what are the behaviors that people currently have, what are the belief systems that drive those behaviors, and how can I use that insight to bring them to smoother processes. So I'll speak a little bit to some examples of how we drove adoption for a user feedback tool that had been purchased but not really used, and also how we developed a better insight into how the product development cycle was happening at the organization to improve accuracy of estimations. And so how we can use these sort of human-centered approaches to solve quite technical problems. I then couldn't get enough of change. You know, who can? It's a constant. And so I joined the product operations team at Babbel, which is a language learning app based in Berlin. And I learned a lot there about the whole learning process in general. But the first task that I was given was to understand how do we better streamline product planning across a rapidly growing organization with 20 plus product teams already, and how do we really understand how we communicate and collaborate in that scaling environment. I realized at that point that in tech change is constant, and so I used my transfer to Babbel to also take a course with ProSci that offers a number of change management courses to equip me with some more tools and frameworks to understand how I can help my teams navigate this in a smoother way. And once again, because I can't get enough of change, I moved on to the next challenge at N26 a couple of years ago. N26 is a leading digital bank in Europe, and there I've been involved in rolling out a number of different processes, tools, new systems of doing things, and most recently helping to better formulate our portfolio management and how we document our roadmaps. And so I'll be sharing some examples from there as well in how I've been tracking adoption and better documenting the progress around those change initiatives at my most recent opportunity to experience change. But let's pause for a moment to talk about what change management actually is in the way that I understand it, and also how ProSci as an institution defines it. So ProSci defines change management essentially as the application of a structured process and a set of tools for leading the people side of change for a desired project outcome. So there's a lot of change management discussions and how that relates to business processes at N26 in the banking world. But what my approach is very much looking at that human aspect of the emotional response to change, the brain power that goes into navigating and understanding change and adopting it, in having it become a part of your everyday in order for your teams to work more effectively, for you to enjoy your job more, for me to be doing my job in product operations. And that kind of brings me to the next topic, which what does product operations even do? And what does it even have to do with change management? So when I first entered product operations, I had a question, what is this? What do I do? At the time, there were no established courses for product operations. So I asked my peers in other product operations positions, and they recommended to actually explore change management as something that could really equip me well for this role. And I found that it actually did help me a lot in really understanding how I can help drive our product, tech, and UX peers in an interconnected ecosystem where we're all working together in the most effortless way possible. And this is, of course, the vision. But the idea is that when it comes to change that feels complex or overwhelming, we're helping to make it simple. And how do we do that? So I'll illustrate these 4 points that we consider our 4 pillars in the core operations team at N26. So something that has been discussed a lot today is AI. Cannot escape this talk either. But I think it's a really interesting way to illustrate the value that product operations teams bring in driving this concept of operational excellence. How do we work together effortlessly. And so when it comes to enablement, what we do as a team is we help all those AI tools that people want to try, that they want to set up and establish. We make sure that as an organization, we have the contracts in place and we have the different tools and access management systems and the guidance also for teams to hit the ground running with these tools and really equip them with what they need to do their best work. Secondly, we want to make sure that we're providing our teams with insights on how they're working. In this case, with different AI tools, who's accessing it and why, what kind of use cases are we pulling out, where can we further improve our guidance, what tools are actually not working for the teams, and maybe we should move away from. So these are not insights about how our products are performing out in the markets, but rather how internally we can level up to do an even better job in serving our customers. And thirdly, we're also critical in establishing a strong culture, a really strong cross-functional culture across all our different teams. And in the case of AI, this might mean creating trainings or engaging talks where we are helping to demonstrate showcases for interesting use cases for these tools in all hands, or different fun learning environments, or organizing even external events in the actual office to get everyone involved in this wider shift, this wider cultural shift. And then finally, especially in a regulated environment like banking, it's so critical to have someone in the organization maintaining a source of truth, ensuring that things are documented in a centralized way. And this is really just to make sure that the right people have the right information at the right time. And if we establish that and we have these sources of truth, we can move much faster as an organization. And so all of this kind of builds up to better velocity for teams. And in terms of source of truth, a lot of the change initiatives I've been involved in my product operations role is around establishing a source of truth from a previously fragmented experience. And we usually use this analogy at N26 on the difference of moving through change with or without product operations. So without product operations, imagine you're packing for a trip and you don't know what the weather is going to be. You're not sure what you're going to need. You picked a suitcase that was too small for the length of the trip, and you're just throwing everything in. You're packing last minute, and here we go. Got to catch that flight in an hour. So a lot of stress, a lot of confusion. It's all those animal idioms put into one. And the idea is that with product operations, or also with these tips that I'm going to share with you, that even if you don't have a product operations function, you could apply. You're moving into this journey of change with more organization, with more clarity. What's the weather going to be like? How long are we going to be gone? What are we actually going to need? How do we sort this and categorize this in a clear way? How do we break this up so that it feels less overwhelming? And how do we plan far ahead in time? So going to the animal idioms, starting with the feeling of being a fish out of water. I know that no one really resonated with this one in the poll, but I think that some of these tips are still going to be useful for you. So this is all around setting the context for change. And here I'm going to give you actually a bit of academic thinking from anthropology on this. But essentially, we're in feeling like a fish out of water, we're really thinking about, from an anthropological perspective, how we move through change. And when we think about as humans moving through change, it means moving from one state to another. And often in between, there's actually this transitional state that in organizations we often don't think about. There's this liminal change space. Change doesn't happen from one day to another. And how do we navigate this transition that can often feel very lonely and confusing and uncomfortable because we're moving out of our comfort zone in many cases? Well, what I found in certain organizations, like when we were driving a Dashlane better user feedback structure and use of these tools that previously hadn't really been factored in to how they were doing their work, we found that we needed to create the space for co-creation, to invite people in to share this journey so that that liminal space didn't feel so lonely. And so, how did we do this? Well, we looked first of all at what are our current rituals and routines that we can leverage. Because in anthropology, we often think about this concept of ritual change and what are the different rituals that we're navigating as an organization, and how do we better um, leverage these rituals and explore the change through what's already a collective established experience. And so thinking about what are your current all hands, what are your stand-ups that you can take a small part of to address the change and bring people in smaller decisions around it is a good way to start. Another piece was on co-creating your ideal state after changing. This created a shared vision that helped bring everyone along and really feel that they were establishing this communitas or shared sense of a shared experience. And so in that case, we didn't really have a good sense of how this tool was actually going to be used in how they were currently doing development and managing their development cycle across teams. And so we did a co-creation workshop with a number of stakeholders from UX, product, and tech to really model out what's our ideal vision for the product development cycle. And based on that ideal vision of what it should look like, where are we at right now? And then that really helped also everyone get a sense of together why we need to change to move to a better position. And so that mapping of the current state to the ideal through that co-creation process really helped bring together a number of cross-functional champions that helped us further evangelize this change, this new approach to maybe streamlining how we were approaching product development and talking about the different phases of it. And it leveraged a tool that we use to contextualize other tools in the context of how product development was happening in the organization. So moving on to the top scenario that everyone resonated with. So let's talk about not just herding cats, but also riding elephants. We're going to get a bit crazy here. And this is really around how do we ensure alignment around change? So one of the first books that I was recommended by a product operations peer when I started on this journey of finding out how change management could be relevant to product operations is Switch, which is written by Chip and Dan Heath. And it really looks at this concept of the logical and analytical rider in all of us that helps give us direction and keeps us on track. But then it used the analogy of an elephant as our emotional side, this huge piece of us that really lifts us up and motivates us and has this persistence to keep going until the end, even when we feel like we're lacking strength. And we need to speak to both of these sides in order to effectively manage change. And so let's look at this rider and this elephant and what each of them need within us to really move the change forward. And so when you're thinking about these recommendations, also consider your organization and just your organization as a cumulative set of humans trying to navigate this sense of what's happening. So I'll use the example of how we did this at Babel when we were streamlining roadmaps. So essentially what we did was I did a bunch of interviews. I gathered evidence of how people were mapping out different types of roadmaps in different formats across slide decks and spreadsheets and to whiteboards in virtual whiteboarding tools. And then when I collected all these different fragmented places and I presented this to people, to our PMs, they understood the problem. Their writer was like, yes, this gives me a direction. We have to streamline. And then I provided them with a roadmap for their roadmaps. But I gave them a timeline. I gave them a set of, okay, not everything's going to change right away, but I want you to know what's ahead. And so these are the changes that I want to make. And we're going to break it up into these phases. this also helps speak to the elephant in these PMs, which is the feeling that change is overwhelming. That, oh, I've been using this format for my roadmap for a long time. I don't feel comfortable changing it. So how do you shrink that into smaller chunks? How do you say, well, for now we're gonna do a transitional format that still pulls in these and these aspects from your old format, and then when you feel ready, we'll, like, in a couple of months when you have your quarterly planning, we'll move it to this format, which is going to be the final format. And that's one way that you can manage the overwhelm. But another key point is to also win over the elephant by tailoring the why. And really, that goes back to doing a bit of your research, but really understanding, why would someone be interested in this change? What's in it for them? And so we were seeing that some teams were working on the same thing, and there was duplicative work, which generally should be avoided. And so a huge interest for these PMs was to get an understanding of what other teams were working on. And so when we brought them all into a place where everyone could see each other's roadmap, that became the incentive. That became a way to tailor the why beyond just that we wanted more organization and a better high level view on what was happening in the company. And now on to the third example of when you're moving through change and you are worried that something is bound to break. And so this scenario came up for me because often when you're going through change, it can feel risky. Like you're one blunder away from something breaking and you're not sure where it's going to happen or when. And that uncertainty is very uncomfortable. And this is where I found the ProSite change management tools and frameworks that I learned really helpful. There's one especially that I really loved, and that I apply regularly. And I'll give you an example of how I've applied it at N26. But essentially, this is the ADKAR framework. And so this framework is about how far is someone along in adopting this change? So are they aware of why this change is happening or why it's needed? Do they desire the change? Do people want to change? Do they recognize the benefits for them? Okay. Do people know how to change and what it involves for them? Are people able to change? Do they have the tools, resources, the access to take on this critical change? This is especially relevant in terms of adopting new tools or new processes. And finally, are we reinforcing the change? And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in the last scenario as well, but this is a really key point in making sure that change is sustained and that we don't go back to what we were trying to change from. So how I've used this actually to create like a quantifiable metric for adoption of a change is I've just created a very simple tracker in a spreadsheet where each column represents if someone is aware, desiring, know of, is able to, or reinforcing the change. And in this case, we were doing it to track adoption of a new place and format to document roadmaps so that they're more accessible and centralized for our teams in constantly reinforcing that source of truth. And so this has been really helpful for me and in making sure that I'm proactively tracking, especially in an organization where I'm now helping to coordinate 100 plus teams and 700 people org, to really understand where am I maybe facing someone that is struggling with this. And for example, we can see here that we have quite a few people on the product side in this customer risk lifecycle segment who are further along. They are in progress with being able to adopt this change, but some of their peers in technology division, they are struggling still at the knowledge stage. They don't really know how to solve it yet. And so how can I leverage these product peers to empower and support their technology peers in getting to the able stage? So this is some of the ways that you can use this tool. And finally, let's face the elephant in the room. So what is what happens when you can't sustain change or when there's unspoken doubts or concerns about the change, and this happens inevitably. So one of the things would um, that I would recommend from this is really thinking about uh, how can you really be observing what's happening and what's maybe being unsaid. And for this, you have to take a note from the anthropologists in doing something that we call participant observation. And so this is really about participating, of course, as a member of your product org, but at the same time being observant and cognizant of what is happening, how are people behaving, what are their like emotional reactions, what seems to be their collective experience, and what is maybe feedback that you need to help bring to the surface so that we are bringing that elephant into the room and talking about it openly. Another thing that I found really helpful, and I did this to help, for example, move us into a stronger adoption for a certain feature of our Atlassian tool system. In Jira, I developed a decision tracker for decisions we're doing to streamline how we're approaching things across this rapidly growing product organization. And I didn't just document what the decision was, but we documented who was involved in making it, when it was made, and why. And this really helped make sure that when we were facing resistance further down the line, when people were wondering, wait, why did we even do this change? Can we backtrack? We had something to share, and that really helped clear things up and reduce those blockers later on. Also, one way that product operations is commonly described is as connective tissue. This is, I think, really important to sustain change. This is all about building those cross-functional relationships that help make sure that change is embedded, that you are able to do that participant observation, but that you also have others in other functions helping to provide that feedback to you and also evangelize the change elsewhere in the organization. And finally, it's really important that you get sponsorship from leadership. This is another thing that they teach in the ProSci Change Management course. People tend to trust their managers more than any random person speaking to them about that they need to change in a particular way. And so you can leverage those management relationships, those reporting relationships, not as a measurement of someone's performance or to be used in performance assessment, but rather this sense of trust and the opportunity to bring in respected and experienced voices in the company to ensure that people know that this change has value and is worth it in the end. And so with that, I want to leave you with a little recap of my tips. So if you are going through change in your organization and you feel like a fish out of water, think about establishing the context for change and really embedding it in a co-creation process that you bring into your existing rituals and relationships. Secondly, really think about when it feels like you're herding cats, talk to both the elephant and the rider in your colleagues. So how do you provide that rider the tailored rationale and the plan that they need? And also, how do you speak to that emotional elephant with helping to shrink the change and really give them that tailored sense of why this needs to happen? And thirdly, when things feel like they're bound to break and you don't know where or when it's going to happen, use the ADKAR framework to help proactively track adoption and resistance to the change. And then finally, enable long-lasting change by facing that elephant in the room and really documenting your outcomes, your decisions, and getting both horizontal support in the form of different cross-functional relationships that you leverage, but also vertical support in terms of sponsorship from leadership. And with that, I want to thank you so much. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. I love connecting with peers and learning more, especially in my role now as a product portfolio manager at N26. And now I'd love to respond to some of your questions if we have time.
Marielle, I think we have time for one question. If you don't have a group of champions, Marielle, how do you find them? If you could touch on that a bit for us.
Yeah, so if were using something like the ADKAR framework to track adoption, that's a great way to find early champions. I think another way is to find people who are already halfway through adopting this change. So usually when I've been introducing a new process or a new tool, it has already been someone maybe used it in their previous company in terms of a tool and they really loved it. And so they want to help bring it there. You can even ask in a general chat channel, hey, does anyone have experience with this? A very open ended question and get some sort of past experience and gather some enthusiasm there. Another way is to really get a sense also through just reaching out to different peers who are like-minded about wanting to see positive change in the organization. So for example, when I was a product operations team of one, I tried to identify other people doing operations type roles in other functions, and they could really understand me in the sense that I just wanted to make processes smoother and affect change that would help with collaboration generally across the org. So I found, for example, a project manager who was already trying to drive better practices within his team. And so I was able to, and a PM who really wanted to draw more on user feedback. And so through these kind of sometimes coffee chat conversations, I was able to find these people and establish more of a concrete working group to drive forward the initiative.
Amazing, Marielle. Thank you so much for those insights on the human element of product ops. And a big thank you to everyone who joined today's session. Hope you all enjoy the rest of Accelerate.